Blue lights flashed. The siren wailed through the night. A routine traffic stop? Not quite. What happened next would shock everyone involved, especially the officer who thought he was just pulling over a random driver. Instead, he was about to face a moment that would change his career and expose a harsh truth about racial bias in America. It was late on a Wednesday evening. The streets were quiet, just the hum of tires on asphalt and the occasional flicker of streetlights breaking the silence. In a calm suburban neighborhood just outside the city, a sleek black luxury sedan glided through an intersection. No speeding, no swerving, nothing unusual. But to one white police officer parked nearby, something didn't look right. A black woman in a luxury car? Alone? At night? His suspicion wasn't based on any violation. It was based on something far more dangerous, assumption. With a swift motion, he flicked on his lights and pulled out behind the vehicle. The driver, a composed and elegantly dressed black woman, noticed the flashing lights in her mirror. She calmly pulled over to the side of the road, as any responsible citizen would. She reached into her glove compartment for her registration, rolled down her window, and waited. The officer approached with a cold glare. Hand resting on his holster, he walked with an unmistakable air of authority, but also superiority. Even before he spoke, it was clear this wasn't just a routine stop. His body language screamed suspicion and condescension. He didn't start with an explanation. He didn't greet her. He didn't even say why he pulled her over. Instead, he barked, "License and registration." The woman raised a brow, surprised by the aggressive tone. "Good evening, officer," she said politely. "May I ask why I'm being stopped?" He snapped, "Just give me your license." There was no cause, no reason, just hostility. But this woman wasn't just any driver. She was Judge Vanessa Hall, a respected legal mind, one of the youngest to ever sit on the state superior court, and a well-known advocate for criminal justice reform. She had spent over 2 decades in courtrooms, defending the Constitution and standing for the rule of law. And tonight, that very law was being trampled by someone sworn to uphold it. She handed over her license calmly and repeated her question. "Officer, I'd like to know the reason for this stop." Instead of answering, the officer grew more hostile. "Step out of the vehicle," he demanded. She blinked, confused. "Excuse me. Step out now. I'm not going to ask again." It was a demand made without probable cause, a clear abuse of power. Judge Hall kept her voice even. "Officer, I know my rights. Unless you can articulate a valid reason for this stop or suspect me of crime, I have no obligation to exit my vehicle." The officer's jaw tightened. Frustrated, he reached toward his radio. Maybe he thought he could intimidate her. Maybe he thought she'd back down. What he didn't realize was that every second of this encounter was being recorded by his own body cam and by a young man across the street filming from his porch. And then came the moment that shifted the power dynamic completely. Judge Hall reached into her purse and pulled out her official identification. She held it up for him to see, her gaze steady. "Here's my judicial ID. I'm Judge Vanessa Hall, State Superior Court." The officer's face changed instantly, from confident and cocky to stunned and silent. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The badge, the name, the title, it all hit him at once. This wasn't just some woman in a fancy car. This was a high-ranking state judge. And not just any judge, a judge with power, with visibility, and with the full force of the legal system behind her. She continued, "I suggest you think carefully about your next words, officer. Because right now, you're detaining a sitting judge, without cause, on camera." The silence was deafening. The officer stammered, trying to regain control of the situation. "I didn't know who you were." She raised her hand, cutting him off. "That's the problem. You didn't need to know who I was. Because every person you pull over deserves respect. Every citizen has rights. But tonight, you made assumptions. Dangerous ones." He stepped back, visibly shaken. He had just made one of the biggest mistakes of his career. And in that moment, one thing became clear. Racism, arrogance, and unchecked power don't stand a chance when the law is on the side of justice. What started as an attempted show of control turned into a powerful lesson in accountability. And for the officer, he was about to face consequences he never saw coming. The officer stepped out of his patrol car, shoulders squared, flashlight in hand, and walked briskly toward the luxury vehicle. He didn't pause to assess the situation calmly. He didn't approach with professionalism or caution. Instead, he moved with a sense of entitlement, a smirk on his face, and judgment already formed in his mind. As he reached the driver's side, he tapped on the tinted window with 2 sharp raps. Impatient, almost annoyed. The window slid down smoothly. Before the driver could even speak, the officer barked, "License and registration." No good evening. No explanation. No professionalism. Just immediate demands. Inside the car sat a composed, confident black woman in her late 40s. She wore a tailored navy blazer, a simple pearl necklace, and a calm expression. Her name? Judge Vanessa Hall, a woman known in legal circles for her sharp intellect and deep commitment to justice. She tilted her head slightly, raising a brow at the officer's tone. "Good evening, officer. May I ask what this stop is about?" Her voice was polite but firm, but the officer's tone turned sharp. "Step out of the car." No reason, no hesitation, just an escalating command, spoken without legal justification. Judge Hall's fingers remained lightly wrapped around the steering wheel as she calmly replied, "I'm sorry, officer, but I haven't heard a reason for being pulled over. Are you suspecting me of a traffic violation or a crime?" The officer's jaw tightened. He didn't like being questioned, especially by someone who wasn't visibly afraid of him. His hand inched closer to his holster. "I said step out of the vehicle. Don't make this harder on yourself." There it was. The threat. Thinly veiled but clear as day. But Judge Hall didn't flinch. She was no stranger to law enforcement behavior. She had heard hundreds of cases involving similar stops, far too often targeting people of color. And now, here she was, experiencing it firsthand. She took a slow breath and spoke clearly. "Officer, I'm going to remind you, this is an unlawful stop. You haven't presented probable cause. Under the Fourth Amendment, you're violating my rights by escalating without reason." But instead of backing down, the officer's voice rose. "I don't care who you think you are. Get out of the car now, or I'll make you." In that moment, it was crystal clear this wasn't about traffic. It wasn't about a crime. It wasn't even about suspicion. This was about control. A power trip, a belief that his badge gave him the right to intimidate someone who looked out of place. Because in his mind, a black woman in an expensive car meant one of 2 things. She was either a criminal or someone pretending to be more important than she really was. What he failed to realize was that this woman didn't need to pretend. Judge Hall knew the law better than he did. She had written opinions that shaped how laws were interpreted in courtrooms across the state. She had sent corrupt officers to prison and had publicly called for deeper reforms in police training and racial bias awareness. This wasn't just another stop. This was a moment of reckoning. And while the officer thought he was in control, he didn't realize 2 critical things. First, his body camera was on, and every second of his aggression was being recorded. And second, across the street, a teenage bystander had taken out his phone and started filming the encounter from his porch. The entire world was about to see exactly how this officer treated a law-abiding citizen based solely on her appearance. The tension hung thick in the air. Flashing lights lit the night, and the only sound was the low hum of engines and the faint click of the recording phone. Judge Hall sat still, unshaken. She wasn't just going to defend herself. She was about to hold this officer accountable in a way he never expected. And soon, he'd learn the hard way. You can't bully justice, especially when it's sitting in the driver's seat. Judge Vanessa Hall sat still, composed, and unshaken, even as the officer's tone grew increasingly aggressive. Her calm presence contrasted sharply with his arrogance. She had seen this kind of behavior before, from the bench, in countless court cases involving police overreach. But now, she was living it, and she knew exactly what to do. She looked directly at the officer, her voice cool and unwavering. "Do you know who I am?" The question wasn't meant to intimidate. It wasn't said with superiority. It was a final invitation for him to reconsider his actions before crossing a line he could never uncross. But the officer, caught in his own prejudice and ego, rolled his eyes and scoffed. "Doesn't matter. You people always try to act like you're above the law. You people. Those two words sliced through the air like a knife, loaded with contempt, laced with racism. And that was it. That sentence, reckless, prejudiced, and caught on both body cam and cell phone, will become his undoing. There was a pause, a silence that lasted just long enough to feel like the world had stopped spinning for a second. Then, deliberately and without a trace of panic, Judge Hall reached in her handbag. The officer stiffened, hand twitching toward his holster. She noticed, of course, and calmly said, "I'm retrieving my identification." Slowly, she pulled out a leather badge case and unfolded it, holding it up to him. The gold insignia gleamed under the streetlights. The embossed lettering read, "State Superior Court, Judge Vanessa M. Hall." The officer leaned in and read the name. His expression changed instantly. His smirk vanished. His jaw slackened. The blood drained from his face. "Judge Vanessa Hall," he stammered. I didn't mean, but the damage was done. The footage was recorded. The witnesses were watching, and there was no walking it back. She stepped out of the car, not because he told her to, but because she was now the one in control. She walked slowly toward him and stopped just short of his comfort zone, then leaned in slightly, locking eyes with him. Her gaze wasn't angry or emotional. It was powerful, exact, and deliberate. "You just unlawfully detained and threatened a sitting judge," she said, her voice like steel. "Do you realize what that means?" The officer, once overconfident, now looked like a rookie on his first day, lost, vulnerable, and terrified. She didn't stop. "Every word you said," she continued, "every command you gave without legal basis, it's all documented. And that sentence, you people, that's racial profiling. That's abuse of power. That's misconduct on camera." He tried to speak, but nothing coherent came out. "I know the law," she said firmly. "I help write it. I uphold it. And tonight, you decided to ignore it. Not because of what I did, because of what I look like." The officer took a step back, suddenly unsure of everything. His training, his judgment, his authority. His posture had changed. No longer tall and commanding. Now, defensive, uncertain. Judge Hall took a deep breath and stood tall. "I've worked for over 20 years to reform this system," she said. "But you are exactly why people don't trust the badge anymore. And trust me, there will be consequences." With that, she turned and walked back to her car, her dignity intact, her strength unshaken. The officer was left standing in the road, not just as a cop who made a mistake, but as a public servant who just embarrassed himself, his department, and his city in front of the world. He thought he was pulling over someone he could intimidate, but instead, he pulled over justice itself. Within just 24 hours, the officer's world turned upside down. The footage from his body cam, once seen only as a routine requirement, now became the evidence that would expose his conduct to the world. It started with a few shares online. Then local news stations picked it up. And soon, the headlines were everywhere. Judge harassed by officer in racially charged traffic stop. Justice meets injustice. Cop learns the hard way. Body cam footage shows shocking mistreatment of black judge. Clips of the stop were shown on morning talk shows, discussed on legal podcasts, and debated on national news. Social media exploded with outrage. Hashtags like hashtag Justice for Judge Hall and hashtag Reform the Force trended for days. People were shocked not just because of the officer's behavior, but because it revealed a deeper truth. If this could happen to a state judge, what chance does the average citizen have? The officer, whose name the department initially withheld, was placed on immediate administrative leave pending investigation. The police chief called an emergency press conference, offering what many saw as a rushed, hollow apology. But the public wasn't satisfied. They wanted answers. They wanted accountability. And they wanted change. Judge Hall, however, didn't speak to the media right away. She wasn't interested in revenge, and she certainly wasn't interested in fame. Instead, she acted with quiet precision, just like she always had in the courtroom. She filed a formal complaint, not just against the officer, but against the department. Her demand was clear: a full review of department policies, mandatory implicit bias training, de-escalation programs, and a deeper evaluation of how officers are taught to interact with the communities they serve. Her message was simple but powerful. This isn't just about me. This is about everyone who doesn't wear a robe or a badge and still deserves respect. And then, in a move that surprised many, Judge Hall made a bold decision. She agreed to attend a community reconciliation forum, a public meeting where members of the community could speak openly about their experiences with law enforcement. But more than that, she insisted that the officer, the same one who had pulled her over, be invited to speak as well. The night of the forum, the room was packed. Community leaders, pastors, students, activists, reporters, they all came to witness what would happen next. When the officer stepped up to the podium, he looked like a different man. Gone was the swagger. Gone was the authority. What remained was someone humbled, stripped of ego by public scrutiny and personal guilt. He cleared his throat and looked out at the crowd. Then he turned to Judge Hall, who sat silently in the front row. "I let my bias cloud my judgment," he began. "I didn't see a citizen. I didn't see a judge. I saw what I expected to see, and I treated her like someone she wasn't. Before I even knew her name, I had already decided who she was. I was wrong." The room was silent. He continued, "This has been the hardest week of my life, but also the most important. I've had to face parts of myself I never wanted to admit existed. And I want to say something to Judge Hall and to everyone else I've failed. I'm sorry." The apology wasn't scripted. It wasn't polished, but it was real. And Judge Hall, poised as ever, gave a single nod, a gesture that said, "Apology accepted." But change must follow. That night wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a bigger conversation. Judge Hall didn't just hold one man accountable. She held up a mirror to an entire system. And in doing so, she inspired a movement far bigger than herself. Judge Vanessa Hall's story didn't end at the side of the road. It didn't end with an apology. And it certainly didn't end with a viral video. What happened that night became a national turning point. One that exposed a deep and uncomfortable truth about how authority is often misused and how even the most respected among us are not immune to racial bias. But more importantly, it became a powerful example of how dignity, restraint, and courage can change the course of a broken system. The footage of the traffic stop made its rounds across every major media outlet. Analysts debated it. Journalists dissected it. And everyday people saw something deeply familiar in it. The fear, the profiling, the unjust assumptions, all wrapped up in a 12-minute video that told a story far too common in America. But Judge Hall wasn't just another headline. She didn't ride the wave of media attention for personal gain. She didn't lash out or seek to destroy reputations. Instead, she used the moment as a platform for change, one grounded in her lifelong commitment to justice, equality, and the Constitution she swore to uphold. In the days that followed, Judge Hall gave only one interview on national television. Sitting with quiet strength across from a respected anchor, she recounted the experience not with anger, but with clarity. She said, "Too often, people of color are targeted based on assumptions. We're seen as threats before we're seen as people. But no matter who you are, what you wear, where you live, or what you drive, dignity should never be optional. Respect should never be earned based on status. It should be given because it's the right thing to do." Her words struck a nerve across the nation. Parents shared the video with their kids. Teachers played it in classrooms. Churches discussed in sermons. It wasn't just about the traffic stop anymore. It was about the conversation it forced the nation to have. But Judge Hall didn't stop there. Back in her state's capital, she began working with lawmakers, civil rights advocates, and law enforcement leaders. And together, they crafted what would become known as the Hall Law. The Hall Law was more than just a political win. It was a transformative piece of legislation. It included mandatory body cam footage release within 72 hours of any traffic stop involving a complaint, statewide de-escalation training for all officers, focused on communication, implicit bias, and non-lethal intervention, civilian review boards in every precinct, with power to recommend disciplinary action. And perhaps most importantly, a new transparency system that allowed citizens to report misconduct anonymously, with guaranteed state review. The bill passed with overwhelming support, thanks in part to Judge Hall's testimony before the state legislature. Standing tall in her robes, she addressed lawmakers directly. What happened to me was not extraordinary. It was ordinary, and that's the tragedy. I just happened to have the power to fight back. Now it's your job to give that power to everyone else. The chamber gave her a standing ovation. Across the country, other states began to take notice. Activists cited her case while pushing for similar reforms. City councils began auditing their own police departments. And in many communities, young black girls and boys began to see Judge Hall not just as a judge, but as a symbol of what strength under pressure truly looks like. She received letters from students, messages from mothers, and emails from police officers who admitted they were rethinking the way they approached their jobs. One letter read, "Thank you, Judge Hall. You stood up with dignity when most would have broken down. Because of you, I feel seen. I feel heard." Even years later, the ripple effect of her stand continued. Her experience was turned into a widely viewed documentary called The Stop: When Justice Meets Prejudice. It won several awards and became required viewing in several police academies and law schools. But if you were to ask Judge Hall what she's most proud of, it's not the bill that bears her name. It's not the press coverage or the public praise. It's the fact that a young black woman somewhere might get pulled over in the future, and that officer will think twice. Because they'll remember what happened when one cop underestimated the wrong person. She didn't want to be remembered as a victim. She didn't even want to be remembered as a hero. She wanted to be remembered as someone who didn't let injustice slide, even when it would have been easier to stay silent. Someone who turned her personal moment of humiliation into a collective moment of progress. Judge Vanessa Hall proved that accountability doesn't have to come with anger, and that true change often begins when one person chooses to say enough. She didn't just hold one officer accountable. She helped shift the system. And for that, the world took notice.